Tonight on PBS News Weekend, the president-elect tapped strong Trump loyalist and FBI critic Kash Patel to head the agency. Then, with high grocery prices across the country, how a food bank in Texas is providing nutritious food for those in need.
For a long time, I would say probably 5 or 6 years, we were serving an average of 50 families a week. 10 years later, serving about 220 families a week. The rising cost of things has, I think, brought more and more families to us.
And as Americans gather for the holidays, how to navigate political differences and find the good in everybody.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by...
In 1995, two friends set out to make wireless coverage accessible to all. With no long-term contracts, nationwide coverage, and 100% U.S.-based customer support. Consumer Cellular. Freedom calls.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. President-elect Trump continues stalking his new administration with staunch loyalists. He said this weekend he'll nominate Kash Patel to be FBI director. Patel is an ardent supporter of Mr. Trump and says the FBI is part of what he calls the deep state conspiracy against the president-elect and his allies. On social media last night, Mr. Trump said Patel played a pivotal role in uncovering the Russia hoax, standing as an advocate for truth, accountability, and the Constitution. The job requires Senate confirmation. Ryan Riley covers the Justice Department and federal law enforcement for NBC News. He's the author of Sedition Hunters, How January 6th Broke the Justice System. Ryan, tell us who Kash Patel is. What's his background? What's his relationship with Mr. Trump?
Yeah, so he started off as a staffer with Devin Nunes, which is really what sort of got him into Donald Trump's orbit. And I think what he's most known for is being willing to do sort of whatever Donald Trump would like him to do. And, I think the difference between him and most folks in federal law enforcement and within the FBI is that, within the FBI, you sort of follow the facts where they lead you, and then you reach a conclusion based upon those facts. And I think with the issue with Kash Patel here is that he sort of reaches the conclusion ahead of time and then tries to implement something that would justify what he wanted to reach in the first place to begin with, right? So I think a lot of the conclusions he comes up with, it's sort of the accusation up front as opposed to necessarily the facts. And we've seen that, repeatedly with Kash Patel, who has also authored a children's book, actually, that stars Donald Trump as king and features himself as a wizard sort of helping out the king. So that's definitely the dynamic that this brings to this FBI nomination. And of course, we should say that Chris Wray still has many years left on his term. And if we were under normal order, this wouldn't be something that would be under consideration because Chris Wray still has several years. And he was appointed, 7 years ago, roughly, by Donald Trump himself. So that term isn't at its end yet. And we don't know whether or not he will be fired, whether he will resign, how exactly his term will come to an end.
Ryan, earlier this year, Kash Patel talked to a podcaster named Sean Ryan about what he thought about the FBI. Let's take a listen.
I'd shut down the FBI Hoover building on day one and reopening the next day as a museum of the deep state. And I'd take the 7,000 employees that work in that building and send them across America to chase down criminals. Go be cops. You're cops. Go be cops. Go chase down murderers and rapists and drug dealers and violent offenders.
Since 2016, practically, the FBI has been sort of roiled with turmoil. What do you think the reaction is going to be to something like this?
Yeah, I can't imagine, a lot of FBI employees had necessarily a great Thanksgiving weekend, because this is really something that I think would be pretty destructive to the Bureau itself and to their sort of way of going about business. And, I think the important thing is looking at broadly what the FBI does. Of course, we hear a lot about these political these cases that relate to politics, because Donald Trump is complaining about them a lot. You have individuals like Kash Patel who are sort of creating a media empire, so to speak, based upon these accusations against the FBI and making children's books off of them and that sort of thing. But that's not really what the FBI fundamentally focuses on at its core. That's a small portion of the work that they do overall. So I think that you definitely have to keep that perspective in mind when he talks about this notion of sending everyone back out to their field offices. Sure, I mean, headquarters is rather large, and that's certainly a discussion to be had about what that balance would look like. And I think fair-minded folks can have that discussion, but it's just not a reflection of what the Bureau actually looks like, I think, on a day-to-day basis. This notion that they're solely focused on going after Donald Trump, especially because you have so much ideological diversity within the Bureau, so to speak, and including some people who are strong supporters of Donald Trump and individuals who resisted going after these January 6 defendants, for example. So I don't think it really accurately reflects what the reality of the FBI is today.
As you say, the FBI is a big organization. What can a director do unilaterally without the support of the staff around him?
Yeah, well, that's the interesting component of this, because, of course, it often is the FBI and the Justice Department working sort of hand in hand, or sometimes there's a little bit of tension there. Typically, the FBI is following leads. Often, a lot of their work is assisting local law enforcement. They have these labs that have great technology that can assist a lot of local law enforcement. So that's definitely what you sort of see the Hollywood image about the FBI being. But truth be told, the FBI does have a lot of issues, especially, I think, technologically. They're just not as advanced as the Hollywood image might necessarily say. So there's definitely some major issues, I think, on the horizon and even happening right now for the FBI. There's this joke internally that the FBI has yesterday's technology tomorrow. And I think that technology question is really going to be a key one going into the next several years of the Bureau. But if you have somebody heading it up who's sort of an overt partisan, that's going to definitely bring it in a different trajectory. And I think you're going to see decline in trust in the FBI.
This morning on NBC's Meet the Press, Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat of Connecticut, was asked about Patel, and this is what he had to say.
Kash Patel's only qualification is because he agrees with Donald Trump that the Department of Justice should serve to punish, lock up, and intimidate Donald Trump's political opponents.
Murphy said he's going to organize opposition in the Senate. Can Patel be nominated, or what's the nomination road going to look like for him?
I mean, it's a question that I think is kind of up in the air right now, because we did see enough Republican senators sort of stand up and say that Matt Gaetz wasn't going to be Attorney General. And I think what you have here is essentially the equivalent of the nomination of Matt Gaetz to be FBI director. And that's the question that we're going to have to see play out. But, it's very easy to create these public pressure campaigns and very quickly have some of these individual senators get a lot of calls aimed at their office. So that's something that you can really put the pressure on those senators. And there's really, three or four of them they would have to lose in order for him not to go through. So that's really, I think, a question that's up in the air right now. But certainly, Kash Patel is raising a lot of worries within the Bureau, broadly speaking.
NBC's Ryan Riley, thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
In other announcements, Mr. Trump said he'll nominate real estate executive Charles Kushner to be ambassador to France. Kushner's son, Jared, is married to Ivanka Trump, and he was pardoned by Mr. Trump in 2020 for tax evasion and retaliating against a witness. The president-elect also said he'll nominate veteran Hillsborough County Florida Sheriff Chad Chronister to lead the Drug Enforcement Administration. Both of those posts require Senate confirmation. And Mr. Trump said his senior advisor on Middle East and Arab affairs will be Mossad Boulos, a wealthy Lebanese-American businessman and the father of Tiffany Trump's husband. The family of an Israeli-American hostage met with the president of Israel today after Hamas released a video that shows him. In the video, Idan Alexander said he'd been held for 420 days and referred to President-elect Trump. Today, Alexander's family said the 20-year-old spoke under duress when he accused Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of neglecting the hostages. Meanwhile, in Gaza, where dozens of hostages are still believed to be held, an Israeli airstrike killed at least 6 people in a tent camp. The strike hit near Muwasi along the coast, once thought to be a relatively safe area for civilians.
May God have mercy on them. They were all martyred. Man, I was just sitting, laughing, joking, and chatting with them online. Suddenly, I see a drone, and then out of nowhere, I find my sister torn apart. Nothing left of her. I bid her farewell. What's happening, man?
And a former Israeli defense minister who served under Netanyahu accused the government of war crimes. Moshe Yalon said the far-right government is trying to annex and ethnically cleanse parts of Gaza. Meanwhile, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees says it has paused aid deliveries to Gaza. The head of UNRWA said the main crossing into Gaza is too dangerous, and recent aid truck convoys have been looted by armed gangs. The Syrian military is sending reinforcements to the northwestern part of the country today in hopes of blunting the insurgents' momentum. A British war monitoring group said the militants are making moves in parts of western and northwestern Syria after seizing most of Aleppo last week. Government forces set up a defensive line and launched airstrikes into Idlib and Aleppo, killing at least 15 people. Global talks broke down today without reaching a landmark agreement to curb plastic pollution as negotiators ran out of time. The delegates were deadlocked on key issues, including the scope of the deal and limits on plastic production. Each year, 400 million tons of new plastic is produced around the world. That rate could climb about 70% by 2040 if nothing's done. Negotiators plan to resume talks next year. And as much as 2 feet of snow can't tackle Sunday night football for a loss in Buffalo. The Buffalo Bills offered fans $20 an hour and a hot drink to shovel out the stadium ahead of tonight's game against the San Francisco 49ers. An early December storm continues to pound the area and cover the region with lake-effect snow. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, a food bank in Texas offers relief to those in need, and how to navigate political divisions at holiday gatherings.
This is PBS News Weekend from the David M. Rubenstein studio at WETA in Washington, home of the PBS News Hour, weeknights on PBS.
Across America, stubbornly high food prices are compounding the problems of hunger and food scarcity. People are facing tough choices in order to stretch their budgets to cover basics like housing and childcare. Blair Waltman-Alexan of Austin PBS and Isadora Day with Austin Vita look at how residents in one community are stepping up to help neighbors in need.
Whew, it's hot. See?
I ran everything as a volunteer for the first about 8 years, and we just got really, really busy. So now this is actually my full-time job. I'm David Horning. I am the executive director at Impact Now Dove Springs. We're the only food distribution that I know of in Dove Springs that's like a permanent location. I'm here 6 days a week. On Tuesdays in the mornings, we pack all of our shelf-stable food. So we're packing cans, we're packing rice, we're packing beans. We're usually packing about 220 bags. On Fridays, we pick up about 7,000 pounds of food from the food bank. Saturday morning, we get here at 7:45. We pack all of our fresh and frozen foods.
2 in the back seat, guys.
And then at 9 a.m. we open and we start distributing.
And it's how many families? 4 or 3?
Everybody's family.
For a long time, I would say probably 5 or 6 years, we were serving an average of 50 families a week. 10 years later, serving about 220 families a week. The rising cost of things has, I think, brought more and more families to us.
It brings a lot into our home. It's a little bit, as we say in Venezuela, a little bit that gives. So this is something to move us forward. Because, I mean, the little money that comes into our home is not enough.
Definitely hear lots of stories of families struggling to buy food.
Texas is now the second highest state in the country for food insecurity. We're not insulated from the costs that other people are experiencing as well. We're spending about $1.1 million a month to purchase food, which is just really not sustainable. Unfortunately, we are anticipating this to continue. Last year, we estimated about 178,000 people were food insecure, and this year we're anticipating about 208,000, and that's just in Travis County alone.
I feel like things are going to continue to increase. I haven't seen it stop yet. But giving them food to help feed their families is kind of what keeps me going.
Yeah, I do. I know who you are.
The people that we serve are just normal people. They have kids, they have families, they have loved ones. They just want to eat and be healthy. And a lot of them also want to give back.
I'm a great staffer. Excuse me.
I would probably say 70% of the volunteers that we have were previously in line. They realized that there was a need for support, so they offered to help. They might still be getting food from us, but they wanted to do more themselves. We love Dove Springs, and we love helping people.
Good morning, Maria. Doing okay? How are you? Did you?
The presidential election laid bare political fault lines across the country, stark divisions that can be even more intense when they involve loved ones. William Brangham looks at ways to handle this post-election stress and find a little holiday season hope.
After an election, by definition, there's a winner and there's a loser. Triumph on one side, disappointment on the other. When those two sides exist within one family, though, that can complicate any Thanksgiving or holiday gathering. My next guest has some ideas on how to navigate these tricky waters and how to find the good in others. Jamil Zaki is a professor of psychology at Stanford University and author of Hope for Cynics, The Surprising Science of Human Goodness. Jamil Zaki, so good to have you on the program. This has obviously been a tumultuous year, a very divisive election. How would you counsel someone who is potentially going to have a meal or a visit with someone who they might see as having completely contrarian views to their own? How would you counsel them to go about that?
I think, first of all, let's acknowledge that this is a hard season. It's a hard season in general, but when you add political division, it becomes even harder. So I think it's natural to feel that apprehension. But I think oftentimes we assume that people we disagree with must be far more different from us than they really are. We assume they're more extreme, more hateful, more anti-democratic. And I would say that replacing some of those assumptions with curiosity about what the people in our lives actually believe is a good place to start.
So let's say you are a little bit more certain that the person across the table does have starkly differing views. Do you think it's a good idea for people to try to reach across the table metaphorically?
I think it depends how they're reaching across. Oftentimes we try to reach across the table with a sharp left jab, focusing on trying to convince other people that we're right and they're wrong, or even that our opinions are morally superior to theirs. Well, when people see that you're trying to browbeat or convince them, guess what? They can tell, and their defenses go up. A much more powerful and connective way to reach across the table is not with statistics or opinions, but with stories. So for instance, if somebody holds an opinion that's really different from yours, you might ask, hey, how did you come to feel that way? Research finds that when we share stories with one another, we might not end up agreeing, but we respect each other's positions more and often discover more common ground than we would otherwise.
I mean, I hear everything that you are saying, but I know you know also that sometimes people hold on to these beliefs. They will resist all of these entreaties to try to see goodness in the other because it's affirming to their own sense of self that they believe X.
I think that's right. And it's easier, though, to do that with strangers or with people that we're not actually in contact with. If you ask folks Democrats or Republicans, what do you think people on the other side are like? They hold on to their deep and often quite negative opinions about that other side in the abstract. When you present them with a real human being who's interested in them and wants to have a conversation, things often go differently. In my lab, we brought Republicans and Democrats together for Zoom conversations. After these conversations, we asked, how did it go? And they said it was delightful and informative. They were shocked by how reasonable and open-minded the person on the other side really was. And that lowered the temperature on their own disdain or even their own hatred for the other party.
Do you think that there's some broader societal good if we as individuals do this type of bridge building that you're describing?
We have lost sight of so much common ground that most Americans actually share, even ideologically. We imagine, because we've become so polarized and because the media often presents extreme versions of each side, that these sides have nothing in common. If you look at people's attitudes on real political issues, it actually turns out that most Americans agree on a lot. But we don't discover that agreement if we never talk, if we avoid one another. So those conversations that we have over the holidays, they can help us build coalition, understand that there's a lot that many Americans share, and maybe start to figure out goals that we have in common and how we can work towards those goals.
Are there other things that you would suggest that people do to try to bridge these rockier divides?
You know, the first thing that I would say is to just be a little bit humble about what you know and what you don't know. You mentioned that in some cases, I might know that my uncle or aunt has an opinion that's really different from mine. And that's true. Maybe I do know that about them. But I probably don't know that much about how they came to have that opinion. And I might not actually even be right. You know, there was a study that occurred right after the 2016 presidential election where researchers used geotagging to figure out where people were going for Thanksgiving dinner. And when people crossed from a Republican area to a Democratic one or vice versa, they stayed at dinner for an hour less than if they were having dinner with people who agreed with them. Oh. We work so hard to avoid one another that we often miss out on even knowing the people in our lives. So I guess I would just say that it's important to know what we don't know. And oftentimes that's more than we want to admit.
All right, Jamil Zaki of Stanford University, thank you so much.
Thanks very much, William. It was a pleasure.
Before we go tonight, a personal note. My colleagues and I want to express our heartfelt thanks to executive producer Rachel Welford. She's led this broadcast ever since it moved under the WETA umbrella nearly 3 years ago, and now she's decided to move on. Rachel, we're going to miss you, and we wish you all the best in your next chapter. I'm John Yang. Thanks for joining us. Have a good week.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.